And for those of you who have just joined, we're just going to give it another minute just to allow people to move from the last meeting to this meeting. It feels like everybody's calendars are pushed back by like exactly 3 minutes every day because of this phenomena of Zoom. People needing to get up and stretch or, you know, make sure their kids aren't like burning the house down, etc. between meetings. Okay, well, I think we're gonna kick things off, and I want to welcome everyone to this amazing new series of presentations that we've put together about a really important piece of technology that is starting to emerge in all of our conversations around privacy and compliance. And for any of you who are familiar with any sort of product launches or plans, you know that on your slides there's just a lot of boxes and arrows and you know different ways to convey the different roles of the ecosystem. And more often than not, as we sort of you know discuss the modernization of privacy and where the IAB is going in terms of transparency and consent framework. So the one that is was developed in Europe for the GDPR, but also the one that we're developing in Canada. Oftentimes we have to now stop and make sure that everybody understands what the box that says CMP is understood. So that is what brings us to this series of discussions. IAB globally is doing a lot of work, not only on the TCF framework, so this is in order to comply with the GDPR, as well as PIPEDA and CPPA, but also on the larger level, you know, looking at global frameworks, looking at Project ReArc, and the fact that, you know, there's going to be a shift in the way that we think about consent and the consented web, and, you know, looking at whether it's cohorts or whether it is unique identifiers. Either way, there will still be a requirement for a consumer to express their choice and their consent in a sort of a centralized, standardized way. And so enter the CMP, the consent management platform. And so there are several players in this landscape. Amongst the largest is our speaker today, Quantcast, who has been a partner with the IAB on the TCF front for years now, working to comply with the GDPR. And so we're very, very happy to kick off this series of conversations. Today we have Heinz Baumann with Quantcast, who is going to take us through the ins and outs of, you know, CMPs in general, give us a little bit of a definition, but also talk specifically about the work, the great work that's being done at Quantcast. So with that, Heinz, I'm going to pass it over to you. Also, before we get started, want to make sure that you're using the Q&A section within the interface to post any questions. We're going to keep the questions to the end of the presentation, I think, just so that we can continue with the flow. But that doesn't mean that we can't go back and look at all of the questions that come in as they do. And Jill will be handling the Q&A after the presentation. So for real now, Heinz, take it away.
Thank you very much, Sonia, and welcome everybody. I can probably say good afternoon to everybody over in Canada. Lovely to be here. As you heard, my name is Heinz Baumann. I'm the head of product for privacy and identity here at Quantcast. And I was one of the few people about 3 years ago that kind of invented what today is the TCF. So was actually developed here at Quantcast, the first prototype on how can we pass consent from a browser on a publisher's web page to all the different vendors in the advertisement ecosystem. And since then, the things got evolved, and I'm going to talk to you today about the consent manager. What is a consent manager? Why is a consent manager important? And how this applies together. And then going to also talk to you about the offering that Quantcast has with Choice. And so let's just dive in here. The quick agenda, I already mentioned this, there's an overview about the CMP. We talk about Quantcast Choice, we do a little demo, and then there's a few steps, kind of a little checklist on that you can, take back. That is kind of, what is it I need to do to get started? So before I start, quickly, introduction about Quantcast. Who are we? So we have a long history building solutions for publishers and the ad ecosystem. About 15 years ago, in 2006, we started with Measure, a real-time audience and analytics tool. In 2009, we created the strong programmatic platform. We also have an advertised business that we have at Quantcast. And as I mentioned, in 2018, we got all faced, like everybody else, with GDPR and e-privacy directives. And so we kind of put our heads together, how can we solve that? And there was one lovely afternoon that our privacy counsel walked over to engineering and said, hey, I need your help. I don't think there's anything moving here with what we need to do to support GDPR. And so that was kind of the start of us thinking and starting building what became the TCF. We are kind of shaping the future for privacy first digital advertising. So we are a core contributor and the IAB TCF. I'm a member of the IAB Tech Lab commit group and other working groups at the IAB Tech Lab. My colleague Matthias Matthesen over in Europe is in the IAB Europe board. So we are heavily involved there on where we're going with the transparency and consent framework. And we helped over 25,000 publishers implement the CMP on their properties so far since we started. We're moving industry forward. So we active members in many different groups, WVC, Prebid, I mentioned IAB. And then we extensive discussions across the industry. So we are talking to publishers pretty much daily in the US, in Europe, about their needs around privacy. We have in-depth technical conversations with SSPs and exchanges, and also started doing the same with brands and advertisers, and providing context for multiple agencies and consent and market changes. So it's a quite interesting place to be. So what is a CMP? You might ask, why do I need to have that? So I can advance here, yes. So what is a consent management platform? A CMP is a tool to help manage compliance with privacy regulations like GDPR, CCPA, soon Canada's regulations, using the transparency and consent framework or another industry-wide developed framework. Like in the US, we have a US privacy framework that we created. The CMP empowers the owners of domains to obtain, manage, and propagate consumer consent to share the data on the site or with associate vendors. So there's a lot of things in that sentence. So the consumer who is on your web page is in control over what of their data is going to be used. You as the host of the web page are responsible to disclose to that consumer that what's happening with the data. Now, how does the vendor downstream in the ecosystem know that the disclosure was given and that what the user decided? Because they might not be on your page, right? You have, and I go into this in detail how this works. So this is what basically kind of the consent manager platform is providing, is getting you the tool that can disclose the information to the end user, collects the end user's choice, transports that then through the ecosystem so that everybody knows whether consent was given or not. And in the industry, in the digital advertising industry, the IBTCF, the Transparency and Consent Framework, is the only consent solution that was built for the industry by the industry. So here's kind of the high level view, and I have another slide I'm going to show you in detail how this actually works. But the high level view is here you have a web page, there's an ad space. The publisher needs to figure out, am I disclosing the right information? What do I need to do? Then the ad tech person will need to know who is allowed to receive the data. And then further downstream, all the other vendors that may do something, the vendor that may fulfill the creative, am I disclosed? Does the user know that I'm in this game? Did I get consent from the user? So that's kind of big piece ecosystem, how this is going to work. You may think, I have a cookie banner. Everybody sees these that says, oh, we're using cookies, are you okay? And you can click OK or on X button. Typically, these only have an OK button. They don't have a button to say, no, I don't agree with you. I don't want to have you use cookies. That's not enough, right? When you have new regulations, like the regulation that comes up in Canada, that's more strict, there needs to be more information disclosed, and there needs to be more information transported. So there is, there needs to be standard language to share user consent across sites. Typically, when you have a stronger regulation, they will kind of demand that there is a certain way to disclose the information to the user. There needs to be information that passed along to third parties, knowing whether or not a user has been informed and about the data processing and whether they gave consent or objected to it. And we need to transmit that user privacy preference beyond your direct partners. A cookie banner cannot do this. That's why the CMP, the consent management platforms, were created. So IB Europe Transparency and Consent Framework, I mentioned this a couple of times, a standardized and scalable framework for publishers, advertisers, and vendors on how to provide transparency and control about user data, capture, and management. So this is the detail slide, how this works. So we have on the left-hand side, there's a web page. There's an ad space. So the web page comes up. I need to first get from the user consent that we can use the data. So here comes up a CMP, which is the part that's kind of right next to it. Do I get consent? User can say, agree. I'm agreeing with you collecting the data and whatever you do. I can say, the user can say, I disagree with what you do. Or the user can go and get more detailed information and then maybe tweak some of the parameters. Like, one purpose, I'm okay with you doing this, another one, I'm not okay with doing this. I'm okay with these 5 vendors, but I'm not okay with these other 5 vendors. So how does this populate through the ecosystem and why this is important? So let's go with the first easy case where people just click agree, which a lot of people just automatically these days do. They know where the button is. And just go click agree and get rid of that disclosure. So that's the green part in this slide. And so the user gets okay on the web page. That string is created. It gets passed along with the ad request. The exchange sees that there is a consent given. Oh, and everybody has consent. So it continues pushing that information through to the DSP. They will do the bid request. It passes this through to the other vendors, and the creative vendors know, oh yes, I do have. So that's going to be where it's all green, and everybody has happy got the data. They can use the data to get the best matching ad for the person in front of that computer on this web page to serve, which the hope that they hopefully click through. That gives money for the publisher. Now the user can say disagree. That would be the red one. Obviously there's going to be no, and so I cannot use the data. Well, I can still pass this along, but we can't use the data. Or the exchange may have the rule saying, I'm not passing this along if I don't have consent. Most of them pass it through to the next level, but the vendors will need to make the decision when they see this. The end effect of this is going to be no consent. Then there's not going to be an ad served that is valuable to the user, most likely on this web page. So the click-through might be a lot lower than you have with a consented type consented user. There are some vendors who, when they see no consent, they don't operate at all. So there is another thing that needs to be aware of, that it could be they're not bidding when they see no consent, or that's something we need to be aware of. The third option was the one that we have if the user will go in and does some more detailed reviewing what there is and say, okay, I want to not have this vendor work with, I don't want to give the data to this vendor because I don't like them, or whatever, or I don't want to have you collect data for optimizing advertisement, whatever it is. So there is partial consent coming in. So that will be green line in, and then one person, okay, I have consent, I'm good. I don't care about this purpose because we don't use that anyway. Continue on, goes in. But then at one point there is, oh, the creative vendor doesn't have consent. So they will not be able to, use the data. They most likely will probably not bid on that request. So that is, there's, less opportunity coming back. Okay, so let me go to the next slide. So hopefully that kind of clarifies why this is important to have that consent management platform and the TCF available, because that information needs to go all the way through the ecosystem. It's not only for the publisher on the web that hosts the web page, and anybody who sits on the web page with a tag to check. It's everybody downstream also needs to know whether consent was given, and then based on that make the correct choice in their operation. So how does it impact privacy laws, publishers and advertisers? I think one of the most important things that I've seen in the last 2 years from talking to publishers and seeing when we have issues is obviously finance. There could be, number one, non-compliance, and regulators go after somebody. And the first place they're going after are the large ones, so the big G's and the big F's, for instance, but they also go after smaller ones. So we know about cases, for instance, in Europe, where European regulators went after brands and other publishers if they were not compliant, and that will end up with a fine you get. Advertise revenue, as I explained, they could be either the company has the rule put down that if I'm not getting consent, I'm not going to fulfill the bid. So you may not get the best bid back, or you may not get any back if the user just says disagree. So advertised revenue can be impacted. And then brand trust on users acquisition. For the user, there is, obviously there is some user interruption. So the look and feel is really important on what was created, and the messaging that comes up resonates with end users. And there is other impactors around competition, right? So being privacy and security as a brand, using privacy and security as a brand differentiator, and being aware that there are some companies and they have special rules, like Google is one that's called out. So the consent manager platform is really critical to your success. There's a lot of misconceptions around this, and you can see them on the screen, like people saying, I don't need to have that, consent, other competitors don't use it, it disrupts the user experience. Some of them are they're all valid, but there's important to understand that regulators ignore all this. For them, it's important that things get disclosed. The end user has the information, what's happening with the data. They can make a choice and they can do the right thing. And they want to have that the end users will see that information and can make and take that opportunity to make a choice what they want to, what happened with their data. So let me move in after I probably confused everybody here in the audience and show you how Quantcast Choice works. This is our offering, our CMP that we're working on now. It's 2021, so it's about 3.5 years on, multiple revisions. So Quantcast Choice is a robust yet simple tool for privacy regulation compliance, allowing publishers and advertisers to easily control, customize, and manage user consent and privacy preferences. So we do all the complicated things to make sure that, you know, the regulations are met, and offer a very simple, easy way for you to configure a consent manager and maintain that is that applies to the regulation that you need to fulfill. And you see here a couple examples on the mobile device and on a PC. So a couple stats just to get an idea of what our volume is. So we're seeing about 4 billion plus monthly consent signals. That is consumer interactions across the world. We're having over 3 million active domains that are domains that we're getting log information back, that we know that somebody on that domain saw CMP that month. And we have over 6,000 active accounts. And active accounts are not equal to publishers. Active accounts could be an ad network that serves hundreds of publishers, could be a large publisher corporation that has many publisher sites underneath, and could be brands, could be advertising agencies. So it's everybody, you know, an account could be more than just one. There is about 150,000 individual publishers that we're seeing on a regular basis. So choice feature directly line up with the 4 core functionalities of a CMP, which are purpose notification, privacy preferences, signal storing and sharing, and collecting logs for auditing. So obviously the first part is we need to disclose what we do, so that the purposes, notice of the purpose and vendors for processing personal data. There is privacy preferences, provides user options to allow or disallow processing, and then signal storing and sharing. So we're storing the signal, and then we also share it as part of the API. We can pick the signal up, and we can be attached to the ad ecosystem, to the ad request, and passed along to the vendors. And then we're collecting log data every time something happens on the CMP. We are collecting that because one of the things in Europe is that the regulation requires that at any time a user can ask about, I didn't give consent, but for getting to collecting data, but I see you're collecting data, and you need to have an audit log so you can take a look whether this user actually consented or not. And advancing forward. So we offer tools to simplify consent management. So we have a central portal that allows you to configure the consent manager. We have in the portal vendor management that allows you to select which vendors you're actually going to work with to shrink the list. And then there is a universal tag. So if you're done with configuration, you take this tag, you put that in the on your web page, and you no longer have to touch the web page afterwards. All the configuration happens through the portal. So even if you need to do a change, you can do this through the portal very easily without updating the actual code. We're supporting regular web, AMP for mobile web, and mobile in-app applications. And we also added in our Audit Audience Insights product that comes for free with choice. Here are a couple of things of our customers. There's a lot of people who love us, and you can read the slides yourself. We really like it when people come to us and they tell us that, you know, they heard from a colleague and they said, if you want to use a CMP, you need to go to Quantcast. These are the experts. That's the best quote I heard so far from a client. So yeah, there's a lot of love out there about what we do here, and the simplicity that we have in our tool. And here are some of the brands and publishers that we have. There's many more. I'll show you a couple other ones in the demo of some other nice integrations of some of the brands that we're using or that uses us. So with this, one last slide before I go to the demo. We continue to evolve the digital compliance space. So we started with the CMP to just handle consent, but we're looking into the future. How can we make the solution future ready? Privacy first platform with capabilities to grow consented first party data. So that's kind of the next big thing that we are looking into building on top of our consent manager. Okay, so let me go and switch around. So I need to quickly take here control over and go here. So see that the slide shows, yes. So when you come to quantcast.com/choice, this is the screen you're going to end up seeing, which is kind of the marketing page about simplified consent and compliance management. And then you can either request a demo or you can get started. When you go get started, you get into the flow to create an account. And then once you have done that, then there is going to be this page, which is the empty portal. Nothing has happened yet, where you can say, so there's a couple buttons here: protect the site, protect an app. So we go and actually do this. We protect the site, so that will start up. And then here is kind of an empty version of this and general settings. So I have one prepared, so I'm jumping over to one that's already filled out here. We'll see whether this has refreshed. I think it did. So there's a few sections here that I go over. They're not going into all the details because it's very simple to fill this out. So there's a general settings, and there's regulatory settings, and there's a couple of miscellaneous things at the bottom. So the first thing is the general settings, in like the site URL, what type of styling you want to apply, which regulations applies here, and which country you are from, etc. Then you go to consent scope. This is more kind of based on the regulation. I don't know how this is going to be in Canada, but in Europe, for instance, there is a choice that you can actually go either only show this to users in the EU, or you need to show it to everybody. And then the next one is that you can decide whether you do this just for your site only, or you can do this for a group of your sites. So if you are a larger company and you have multiple properties, you can actually build this so you can have one consent set up for multiple of your sites, and they will share the consent between them. Or you can decide that you want to do this for global, meaning for everybody on the internet. There are some restrictions when you do this that you need to be aware of. And then you can select, what is the how often that the CMP needs to show, and that is configurable as well. The next part is consent configuration for yourself. So for the web host, the publisher, or the brand, or the advertiser, what legal basis do I need to disclose? You can declare them or you don't. It really depends whether you have anything on your page or you collect data yourself for whatever reason. And if you do, you can do the same thing. You can do that the publisher, that the vendor does, and you declare your purpose that you're using, etc. And already done that here. So we have, we'll be setting a cookie, so we need to disclose that there is store and/or access information on the device. Select personalized content, or then also like I have Google Analytics on it, so I do collect data to develop and improve my product. And then there's a Google special thing that I'm not going to into, but there's a Google vendor you can select as well here. So one of the things on the top here that I skipped over quickly is the themes, which is really the styling. So once we're done with this, we can actually quickly go here and bring this up. So you can style the CMP however you want to do this. And I want to quickly show this to you on some examples that I go to. So this is a brand, Rolex. They styled the CMP, the regular one has blue square buttons, and they have their own company color on it, nicely rounded buttons. And then to quickly start this, that one disappeared. Just give me 1 second. That is BuzzFeed versions, is also customized. They have a customized text up here that they worked with us on. They have customized button colors, more fitting with their own, how they do it on their own. So you can do many things here. Same thing, it's set up. You can specify which regulation that tells you which dialog box that is going to show. You can specify, you know, whether this is a modal or that this is a banner. You can override colors, which I've done here, and you see this in a second what it looks like. And you can override pretty much everything through the CSS override. Then there's a regulatory information about the text that shows. You can add links if you need them. This one is the purposes screen, which is based on the vendor declaration. So if you're not filtering or blocking any of the vendors, then everything will be here. You can decide whether you want to use purposes or stacks. The stacks allow you to have a little more user-friendly look and feel in your CMP. And a couple other settings that you can have. And when you do this, so as I said, you go back here and you would grab the universal tag, you copy the tag, you put it on the top of your body in your web page. And then if you start this will look like this. So this is the one I create. This is from the configuration that I just showed you. So this is our little demo page. And so you can see it's differently colored than the default color. And if you go in here, here are the stacks. It tells you personalized ads and content, ad content measurement, audience insight, and product. You can actually open this up. There's a little more blurb of what that really means. And then below there are the purposes that are part of the stack, and the user can either give consent or not give consent based on the stack level or on the individual purposes within the stack. And they can go and say agree to selected or agree to all. And then on the partner screen, yeah, the partners, you see everything here listed, etc. So let me go back to the demo, which I don't know what happened here. My friend Google, come on. Sorry for that. This is not expected, that this is kicking me out. And I go back to the slide that I want to be at. Here, and I need to do that back here. All right, I think we're back. So getting started. So when you got a lot of information here, and it's probably a little bit overwhelming. But here are the key things to really think about to get started when there's the new regulation out, and there's going to be a TCF now for Canada, and there's going to be CMPs. Here are the things that we and pretty much everybody else in the industry, all the competitors that we have, which are really more friends than competitors, say the same thing. Oops. You need to, the first thing is really, probably need to consult with your legal team on what is it that you need to expose. Do we need our own legal basis? Who are we using? How important is this? So that's a decision that needs to be made, because you may end up that you're not having any ads served on your page. Who knows? And then you don't need to have the CMP. So that's something you need to figure out with the legal department. And then you need to figure out what is it that we as the publisher need to disclose. Do we need to do anything ourselves? Then you probably want to also look through, which is the third item here, create a vendor audit and check whether the vendors that you have are those ones that you really want to continue working with, or are these vendors that we want to dismiss. And then you want to look at which of the CMPs is right for the needs that you have. So there's like a key thing. So probably in the consulting with the legal team, you need to select the right CMP for your needs, and you should do a vendor audit to check who are the vendors on my page. Do I need all of them, or are there some that we can drop? And then that will translate into which the vendors you need to expose. Advance the slide here. Choosing the right CMP. So you want to make sure that this is for, the first item is for Europe, but you want to make sure that you have a CMP that will support when we have a Canadian TCF that supports the Canadian TCF. Then you want to take a look at design to get maximal opt-in rates and the most compliant way. So you want to look at how is it get presented? Is it in a way that will help the user quickly get through that consent workflow? Then is it easy to configure and customize? That's kind of, like what we have. Is it something that's very easy to do? And does it have any advanced features to increase compliance and insight while protecting revenue? So is there any additional things that you can have? Is there like you using a vendor that's not part of the vendor list? How can I support that one? Other features that they may have. So that's kind of the work to look at which CMP to actually choose. And I mentioned that you want to do a vendor audit. Not all vendors are part of the TCF. So these vendors won't receive signals to establish a legal basis that is required by the regulation. So you need to look at, is the most revenue partners registered with this? So I don't know, there's a lot of vendors. We don't know yet when we do the TCF for Canada, whether this is the same list, this is a different list, but this is important then to see, are these vendors registered? Are they part of that consortium that makes up the transparency consent framework? If a vendor is not registered, how can I include them in the CMP? And if there are vendors that, or do I still need to have them on or working with them, or we choose another one? These are the kind of decisions that need to be made up front before we can get started. And I think that is the last slide. And with this, I think we have some time for Q&A, and I hand back to, I think, Jill.
Thank you, Heinz. That was really, really great. And it was so nice to see a demo of the product and see how it can be modified and how you can work your brand into it. So it's really great. We do have some excellent questions coming in, and if anyone else has any, please put them into the Q&A box and we'll get to them. The first question we have is from Mary, and she wants to know, is the Quantcast solution customized or customizable for each country's rules?
So yes, so I showed this a little bit. So there is a regulatory section when you configure the CMP. So for this GDPR, which is for Europe, there's not individual European country rules. There's just one rule for Europe. And then there is US, which is it's called CCPA because only for California at the moment. There's more states coming that will be added as soon as we have additional states that we need to support. We add them in. And then if we have, like Canada, there will be another one for Canada. And depending on what Canada is going to be, one countrywide or on the different, you don't call them states, but the different states. Provinces, that's the word, yes. And we're also looking at other countries around the globe that start having privacy laws put in place, like Brazil is another one that we need to add in. The answer is yes, this is going to be customizable based on which country you are in. And it's based on the regulation and what the regulation says. Like, for instance, in Europe, the regulation tells you if you are a company that is registered in the EU, the consent needs to be asked for from everybody visiting the page, regardless where they are. That's why we have this. Everybody needs to see that, and that's important to know. Depending on the regulation, you may need to support, depending where you are, support another country as well, depending what the regulation says. But yes, it's all customizable.
Just to jump in here, this is the crux of the work that IAB Canada is doing now, which is writing the policies that get input into this global framework that the CMPs will be able to access, right? So the work that is being done now on the Canadian TCF string is going to be accessible to Quantcast's CMP, and that is the standard that will be used by other CMPs that are IAB compliant. So just so you see that it sits the access to the regulatory profiles is going to be centralized, and the CMPs operate on those centralized policies that are being developed, just so you can see how the ecosystem works. Just wanted to throw that in there and add.
Yeah, and if you want to join any of those groups, send us a note after, and we can fill you in on the other work that's going on the side. The other next question we have is from Craig. So he asks, how far are we from having CMP functionality integrated within business management platforms like those from Zoho, Microsoft, and Oracle?
That's a good question. So we are not working with any of these, and it really depends kind of what the put it this. Let me answer this way. So the first thing is, like, we Quantcast, we don't work with any of these, and there is no talks yet on whether to integrate with them. It's really up to these platforms to kind of figure out what they need and how this can be integrated with them. Currently, we're operating outside of these. We do integrate with or we do have talks with other, with larger vendors on how we can offer this together with them. I think, to be honest, we don't support these, and I don't know whether anybody, whether these companies are actually thinking about consent management in this way.
So Craig, if that did answer your question, great. If it didn't and you have follow-up, just throw it in the Q&A and we can throw it back at Heinz if you have a follow-up to that. Nathan has a question. CMP only applies to publishers with advertisements on their site. What if we don't have ads, but we track users on our web properties, partially to target them on other ad platforms?
Okay, so I made maybe a little bit of false statement when I said if you don't have ads, because I did see that, where I have to say, to tell the client, you actually may not need to have that. If you're absolutely not working in the ad ecosystem or whatever, there's I think there are pages like educational sites, they don't have that. You don't necessarily need to do this as long as you're not collecting data. So if you start collecting data, then you need to have one. Now you could build it, you can use the CMP like ours and build it. If you don't need any of the vendors, you can actually empty the vendor list and block all of them, or you maybe have one or two. But you can disclose, you should disclose what you are using the data for. So that part I showed you that you can configure on the disclosing my legal basis as a publisher, that's the part that is then it becomes important. And you can use the system to actually have that message come up, which is better than a cookie banner, because you really can disclose, I collect data for, like was the example I had in my demo was, collect data for improving my product. So you can disclose this, it's very clear to the client, to the user, what you do here. So I think you need to look at whether you do any data collection, and if you do that, you should have a CMP on it. Now, you don't need all of the functionality if you don't have ads where things need to be sent across the ad ecosystem, but it provides you with the more granular information that you want to expose to the user that is most likely be required by the regulation that you have in your country.
Great. Okay, the next question we have here, does this solution scale down to be accessible for boutique media agencies?
Well, I think the question back to Jen will be what she means with boutique media agencies. This solution, so CMPs work for everybody, and we see this, right? So I think I could compare this with smaller publishers or smaller brands. They can all use that. So it scales. I think I need a little more, excuse me, clarification what is meant with scaling down and boutique media agencies. But I think it's absolutely scalable. You know, we have a lot of small publishers and smaller brands who use our solution, and they use just the stock out of the box. You know, they could do a little more, especially with the styling, but you can just use out of the box default behavior, and it's, you know, in 5 minutes you have it and you're done, and you have that information. And if any vendor is on your page that requires this and they're looking for that TCF API and to get the consent, they will get the consent and things get sent in. So it's absolutely scalable to any size of
Yeah, I wonder if this is kind of whether this is a reseller question. Jen, I don't know. I don't know if this is.
I don't know if I can put her on her.
Like, is it a resale question, or is it a the ability to white label? Oh, there she is. There's Jen.
Yeah, you can speak now, Jen. I've released you.
Jen, if you feel like it, you've got the floor. You can sort of describe a little bit more what you mean by that.
I just have found that doing research on how we're moving away from the data we use now towards like CMPs and like the post-cookie world and stuff, a lot of the solutions being presented seem to be less accessible to a smaller agency on a technical end, on a cost end, etc. So as an agency that runs a DSP but is quite small, like, would this sort of solution be accessible to us? I suppose is what I'm getting at.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you, Jen, for clarification. Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned, you know, we have a lot of smaller, in quotes, shops that use this. It's absolutely scalable to smaller businesses, and it is also done that way on the price level. Quantcast Choice is offered free of charge. So we want to help the ecosystem. For us, it's not important to make money with this. For us, it's important that you can get the right thing so you can continue serving the ads, and the user has the right to we disclose the information that we need so the user can do a choice. That's what our intent is here. And, you know, as more we can get the ecosystem to use it, the more people can make their choice, the better for the ecosystem.
That's great. Okay, I have another question here, and I think this is going to be Sonia and Heinz answering it together. So I'm going to throw it out there. But if we only do business in Canada, should we worry about this? When is Canada going to have the regulations passed?
Wasn't that a you question, Jill? Like,
well, I know, but it was weird to ask myself a question. So
Yeah, I have Sonia answer that.
Okay,
so
so
you can answer it too. I can answer it, or you can answer it. But.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I mean, what's fascinating about this is the fact that if you are in Canada and you're processing data of a European citizen, you should have already been thinking about CMPs implemented that manage across the TCF in Europe, right? So that's number one, and that's, you know, and that's for, think about the tourism business as an example. If you have a high risk level where you know that a lot of Europeans are coming into your website, and then you've got a lot of second party arrangements that are going on, there would have been a requirement for you to comply with the GDPR by implementing a CMP that actually observes the GDPR, the TCF string. So that's number one. In Canada, in terms of compliance, there is a patchwork of activity that's going on right now where the requirement hasn't been as stringently enforced as the other jurisdictions like Europe. So there hasn't been a penalty on a lack of compliance of privacy mechanisms and compliance in Canada. So what we've had to date in terms of you know, coming into compliance is, well, we're doing the best that we can. So we're kind of disclosing some of the vendors that are there. For those that you can opt out of, well, you know, you can opt out of those. But then there's always going to be some that you can't really opt out of. And because of the fact that there hasn't been a stringent penalty on this stuff, we've kind of let it go in a place where, you know, there's not really one standardized way to get a consented ecosystem going. And so this is why Jill and I got so interested in what was going on in Europe, was because we were like, okay, that's going to come down the pipe here. So we might as well get ahead of it and start planning it in such a way that it's not a patchwork of like, well, in some cases you can opt out, in some cases you can't. We should have one streamlined global approach to compliance in the ecosystem, and then have, you know, whether you have little nuances in each jurisdiction, be able to have that one centralized platform allow to have those nuances for each different market. So if you think about it this way, there are many, many businesses outside of Canada that want to do business with Canadian audiences, and they will need to comply with the CPPA as well. So that means that if you are a US-based organization, for you to have access to a Canadian string and a CMP that subscribes to that string, then it will protect you for the for PIPEDA or for the CPPA. And so sometimes when you turn it around and you look at it from a global perspective and the accessibility of being able to comply with the law, it's an easier way to kind of describe it. If you're in Canada, again, just to summarize, to date, because there hasn't been a penalty, it's been kind of a mishmash. That's changing, and there are solutions available globally that we should be looking at implementing, which is why we're working on the TCF Canada.
I would also say, I mean, even if the CPPA is delayed or if it doesn't go through, we all need to be doing a better job of giving control to consumers and citizens and allowing them to really be in control of their choices. And this is a way to do that. So I think that the law probably will pass, but if it doesn't, we still should be doing better.
Right. Hopefully that
Heinz,
was helpful.
Heinz, do you have anything to add to that? Or do you think we're...
No, you covered this.
Okay. Okay. So it sort of follows that question. Sophia wants to know, how does a CMP interact with the ad choices program?
Yeah, maybe you can give some background on how it interacts in Europe, like, because that's now a very established, you know, live situation. What happened when the TCF launched in Europe, and do the programs coexist? What's the lay of the land there?
So the program coexists. There are two different programs. The regulators require more than what Ad Choices provides. That's why we have that CMP and this transparency framework available. So yeah, that's basically they live together, but they're, you know, the disclosure to the end user that was required by the GDPR is way more than what the Ad Choices is providing. And that's what regulators want to have and see. There needs to be an so I think the big difference is that there is the thing when the ad, you have this little icon you can click on to get to that information and you can take a choice. But the thing the GDPR requires, you need to make the choice upfront before an ad is even served.
Great. Hopefully that answers your question, Sophia.
And also just, you know, in general, what we've been doing. So, you know, as founding members of the Ad Choices programming in Canada, IAB has been working with the DAAC to try to modernize the Ad Choices program and have it so that it coexists, or that, you know, there would be some sort of a model that allows the Ad Choices icon to be preserved in such a way that it could work with the hundreds of CMPs that exist right now, rather than the one or two rigid choices that is offered through Ad Choices. So we're actively trying to come up with ways that Ad Choices can still work within the new TCF framework, but at the same time, we're not making it a dependency. So we're requiring that the TCF Canada string must exist. And then as a side sort of like, component, we're trying to make it so that it could also retrofit somehow within the ad choices program if the industry requires it or needs it, or, and whatever that looks like, we're still kind of trying to work out.
Yeah, and I think a lot of things are going to become more clear in the coming months, right? As we go to committee and see what happens out of Ottawa. So we have a question here. As a member of IAB Europe's TCF, we are working with multiple publishers in Europe and soon in Canada to reward online users financially when they see or click their ads so they can make donations to charities. How can they customize their Quantcast CMP window to feature us as a vendor so they serve a stronger narrative to encourage their users to give their consent to targeted advertising?
That's an interesting question. There is one way to do this is just exposing. If the vendor is not on the TCF list, then we can expose the vendor. We have a feature that allows you to expose additional third-party vendors that are used through the CMP. If the way I understood the question is more like, having a narrative somewhere on the screen in the text, that is something that the publisher who wants to do that would need to discuss with the CMP provider whether this text that is highly quotes regulated can be changed so that there is something in there that would explain this. But typically the first or second sentence in this narrative that we have, that everybody has, is somewhere that, says something like, we and our partners, and on our partners, there's a link, you can get to the partners page, and there we could find you as a partner, and then you can actually have, your own information as the partner. That's already, available. Anything else on top of this has to be, looked at between the publisher and the CMP they're using, including us, whether we can change the actual base text that we have to include something like this. I would think we'd probably be open just to look at this case and see what the, it's an interesting idea actually when I think about this, but what we can do to make this work.
That's great. And sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it does require, the narrative, the text that you see on the CMPs, they have been legally vetted, right? And so there is a default text that comes from IAB Europe for GDPR, and you can, CMPs can do some changes to it, but typically there is quite a little bit of forth and back with legal departments on what that will look like. So the intent is still there, that the regulator need to have, because at the end of the day, it's the publisher is responsible for the disclosure that gets shown. We provide the tool, and so we want to make sure that it's not getting too far off from the original intent. When somebody wants to change it, it can be done, but it's important that there are kind of regulatory requirements that need to be met when we do a change to these to that text that you see on the CMP.
Okay, I have one.
Helps.
I think it does. He says he's going to connect with you, so we'll figure out how you guys can all connect after this. We have 2 minutes and one more question just popped in, so I'm going to ask the question because it's a good one. So if I run ads with a third-party platform that sends users to my website and then have those third-party pixel tracking codes on my website, is it the third party's responsibility to be GDPR compliant and have a CMP, or would my website need to be GDPR compliant? Also, in this instance, would my website need a CMP, or would a cookie disclaimer be enough?
Well, that's a bit of a legal question.
Okay, so they have the third-party pixel tracking code on the web page. That means that you on that publisher will need to disclose to the user that what's happening with the user's data. So you need to have a CMP on your page. And this is actually the regular, because I just read this through here. There is third-party pixel tracking code on my website. That means there is a tag on your page from that third
Yeah.
party. So that requires that you have a CMP on it, and that third party is a member of the TCF, or if not, then when we have this functionality, you can have a non-IB vendor listed. You list this, and then there's some code you need to have to check there's consent before that tag fires. But you're responsible as the publishers to do that.
That was good. So we're at 2 o'clock exactly. So I'm going to say thank you so much to Heinz for being here. It was great. And thank you to everyone who called in.